the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action. Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. It is Friday evening. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. As you can see, I have the bookshelf behind me tonight. We've been alternating. Sometimes we do the bookshelf, sometimes we do the screen. It's good to change things up every so often. And this one, I don't have to have it crammed right against my face. We can have more of a further back view. We've got different books around here. It's all really great. So yeah, for those of you who might be new, might not be familiar with the format of the show, the way we do things here is I give my opening remarks, and then from there we do the roll call. And I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. We find out who is on the other side of the camera. And then from there, I answer people's questions for the rest of the night. And yesterday we had a tremendous show because people kept asking good questions. There was a question somebody asked beforehand. There were some that came in on the Rumble. There were a couple Rumble rants that came in. There were a couple Rockfin, or I don't think there were any Rockfin tips last night, but there was a number of super chats. So that's the way we do it. The second half of the show is really all up to you all. It's all really up to you. You guys make the second half of the show what it is. So, if you have something you want me to talk about, if you have something, a reaction to what I'm saying or a comment or anything like that, feel free to send in a Rumble rant, a Rockfin tip, or a super chat. So yeah, last night's show was a lot of fun because there was a libertarian in the chat against the state, and he wanted to come on. And he came on, and it was a great conversation. So I cut it and I posted it on the YouTube channel. That was a great win. Also, I don't know if you all saw, but a couple nights ago, I showed the conversation or the press conference of Hunter Biden, his press conference that he did, and then I played a clip of who is it? Of Al Capone, the famous Chicago gangster. You're on the list, Piha, and thank you. And I played a clip of that. Well, I sent it to Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore has called me on the phone before. We've texted before. And so I just texted it to Jimmy Dore, and he turned it into a segment on his show that aired yesterday. And then the video just went up today, and he gives me credit for the video. So I think that's a great win and a great step forward for our community. But I'm still buzzing from the high of the amazing conference that we had in Oregon. Video of that conference is coming along. We have different angles, and you got to edit it all together, but it's really, really great. And the Oregon conference was a really big step forward for the Center for Political Innovation. It was really, really a great step forward. So I'm feeling very, very good about that. We have a special community here. We are the city building tendency. We are optimistic, constructive socialists, pro-humanity, pro-growth, and we do some really, really special stuff here. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. And in the second half of our program, I will then make a point of answering any super chats or Rumble rants or Rockfin tips that come in, right? I see there's a couple people on the Rumble. There's a couple people on the Rockfin. And so, yeah, if you got something for the second half of the show, by all means, get me talking, because that's what it's all about. So I really do want to emphasize how much this is really a community effort. And this came up in Peter Coffin and I's chat that we did earlier this week. Peter Coffin and I had a stream together. And in that stream, Peter Coffin and I talked about how ideas really don't grow up in a vacuum. Nothing is very much is independent. And like this book, for example, this book Where is America going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. This book we published in March. This book is the product of conversations that have gone on this stream of concepts that we as a community have developed together. It's often a point that we make in our modern society. No one can point to anything and say, I made that all by myself. Every product in every store is the result of the collective effort, usually of thousands of different workers, maybe only hundreds, maybe only a few, but nobody can point to anything and say, I made that all by myself. And, people will come up, they'll say, what about a wood carver or a basket weaver who weaves the basket all by themselves? A wood carver who carves that wood sculpture all by himself. Well, he's using tools. Those tools are made in a factory by all kinds of different workers. That metal is mined out of the earth, and et cetera. Humanity is a collective species. And I think that understanding that production is collective also applies to intellectual things, right? There are many ideas that have kind of started out or blossomed on these streams that have flourished, and we've seen them. People were calling me. A friend of mine was calling me today and saying that he listened to a Twitter space by some very prominent people, some of which are on the right, some of which are on the left. But there was, a Twitter space, and it was very apparent that people that have listened to our ideas, were included. But I heard that and I felt good about it. But at the same time, I said, you know what? The ideas that you hear on these streams are the product of other ideas, right? I mean, I am very open about the fact that I've drawn heavily from the book, the book Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Palm Dutt. That is a basis for my understanding of capitalism. That I was in the Workers' World Party for many years, and I studied Sam Marcy and Fred Goldstein's writing. I'm very influenced by, Nelson Peary and The Future Is Up to Us and his understanding of automation. The Schiller Institute, the LaRouche people, I've read their material and I've studied, their writing, and I've learned a lot from that. We are all an amalgamation. You are a product of everyone you encounter. You're a product of everything you watch on TV, every book you read, every person you talk to, right? You absorb what is around you. And that's an important thing to remember, right? And that doesn't only apply to material things, right? That doesn't simply apply to the products we buy that are collective, but our minds are an intellectual collective. And, even if you don't hear something with your conscious mind, your subconscious mind is hearing things all the time. And that's a really important thing to remember. So, you want to surround yourself with the most productive and best things, right? I wake up every morning with classical music. I go to sleep with classical music at night because I want my mind to absorb the classical music, because I feel like the classical music is a little bit healthier than what's floating around these days, right? The mass marketed commodified music, is less healthy than a lot of the music of the classical era, Beethoven, Mozart, and Bach. Some people have recommended I start listening to jazz also. The jazz, especially some of the earlier jazz, has some of a vibe like that. So anyway, I'm going to get into my opening remarks now. I just wanted to get some of my thoughts there out on these different topics. Look, we are really a special community here. There's no question about it. We are a very, very special community. And we have an optimistic outlook on life. We are about spreading hope. We are about envisioning a world beyond the rule of markets and profits, where human growth and reason is no longer restrained by the irrationality of the market. We are opposed to World War III. We are opposed to the emerging low-wage police state. We love our fellow human beings. We want to connect and build. We want to get out of the movement and to the masses and connect with the broad masses of people. We want to build something beautiful. That's what we're all about. And it's very unique. It's not unique around the world, but it's unique here in the United States. Here in the United States, you don't get people that talk the way we do. Most of the left is either stuck in the past and just trying to recreate, something from the past, or they've been wokeified and just been absorbing the pessimistic ideology that speaks in the name of leftism now. And we have done neither. We are neither ossified. We are neither dogmatists, nor are we wokeified. We maintain the city building tendency and the optimistic hope that has led to the construction of socialism around the world. And because of that, we sound different than other people. And a lot of leftists, they hear us and they just hear that optimism, and they hear that belief that tomorrow can be better than today. They hear that willingness to listen to people and learn from them and connect with them. It just makes them angry. makes them angry because they were attracted to socialism or Marxism because of the negativity, because they believe that, it's about punishing those bad people. And that's just not what we're about, right? We put forward an optimistic, constructive socialism. Dare to struggle, dare to win. That's what we chanted at our conference. Dare to struggle, dare to win. We start out with the Pledge of Unity, which is the pledge of the World Democratic Youth Federation that came after World War II. You're going to see all of this in the upcoming videos from the conference. They're getting edited. I was talking with the people who did video. You're going to see all of this. So I'm just really, really in love with our community and everything that we have built, and the uniqueness of it, the optimism, and what it means to so many people. And, we're giving people something they would not get elsewhere. We're giving people a hope, an optimism, a constructive message that they wouldn't get elsewhere. So yeah, that's the Center for Political Innovation. But anyway, so the topic for tonight, the news story that I decided to lead with is the news story. It's been all over the news. It was all over CNN today, all over international media. Don't know if you saw it or not, but if you did, it's not a surprise, but 3 Israeli hostages were killed today. Right? Israel is, attacking Gaza, and 3 Israeli hostages have been killed. And I don't think the Israeli government killed them on purpose, but in the process of just overpowering the Palestinians, of bombing Gaza and destroying 20,000 and counting civilian lives. I mean, Israel is just relentlessly murdering the Palestinian people, civilians and Hamas fighters alike. In the process, 3 of the hostages that they were intending to rescue got killed. And many people have pointed out that, these 3 Israeli hostages have gotten way more attention than the 20,000 Palestinians who've been killed. In addition to that, 85 journalists that are just reporters, that are just doing news coverage, have been killed. 85 different journalists, a number of medical personnel and hospital workers and nurses have gotten killed. There's a huge number of innocent Palestinians who've been killed. But these hostages, who the Israelis say that they're going in to rescue, they got killed. And that got a lot more attention. And that shows you how biased the media is. However, it also points to some other things. It points to the fact that many people have acknowledged that it's not getting widely publicized, but it is true that a lot of the hostages who've been returned don't have a version of events that matches the hysterical propaganda that came out after October 7th. We were told the women were all being raped. We were told they were barbecuing babies alive, and that wasn't true. Right? These were not true things that we were being told. And there's been a number of hostages who have said that the Hamas fighters, the Hamas captors, have treated them well. Well, there's now 3 hostages who won't live to tell the tale. Another thing is that this is obviously not the first time that the government goes in with heavy-handed force. The ruling power, the colonizer, goes in with heavy-handed force and kills some of the people that it intends to be protecting. A great example of a similar occurrence would be the Attica prison uprising. I believe that was in 1970. Was that 1970? Attica prison riot. The Attica prison uprising, was that in 1971, right? It was September 9th through September 13th, 1971. In upstate New York, there's a prison called Attica State Penitentiary. And the prisoners there rose up and they seized control of the prison. And they took a number of the guards hostage. And after trying to negotiate a peaceful settlement for some time, Governor Rockefeller of the state of New York just sent the state troopers in, and they ended up killing a number of the hostages. And then for a long time, they tried in the media to claim that these hostages had been killed by the prisoners, that the prisoners had slit their throats, etc. But investigations just continued to show that no, those hostages were killed by the gunfire of the police, and that it wasn't really, when the state troopers went in there, they weren't really concerned about saving the lives of those hostages. They were concerned about crushing the rebellion of the prisoners. at Attica State Penitentiary. Now, a little known fact about what went on at Attica State in 1971 is that the prisoners actually asked that one of the negotiators be a member of the Workers' World Party. There was a Puerto Rican American man. His name is escaping me now. And he was a member of the Workers' World Party, and he'd been running what they called the Prisoner Solidarity Committee. And he was one of the people that the prisoners requested be one of the negotiators. And he was in the prison while the massacre was happening. He was in like a conference room. He was kind of locked in a conference room by the prisoners as the massacre happened. He was one of the negotiators. A little known fact, and that's how involved Sam Marcy and the Workers' World Party were in the Attica prison uprising and the events that happened. At that point, the Workers' World Party had something called the Prisoner Solidarity Committee because they were supporters of the Black Panthers, and they had a bus that went every weekend from New York City, from Harlem in New York City, all the way up to Attica State Penitentiary to enable prisoners to visit their families, because that's one aspect of the Attica State prison is it's very far from New York City. And so if somebody's arrested and goes to prison, it's very hard for their family to visit them. And that was a service they were providing in the Black community in New York City. And that led to them being invited by the prisoners to be the hostage negotiators. And that's an important part of history there. And yes, the guards who were being held hostage were killed by the firepower of the state troopers. And that Governor Rockefeller, who's the father of the war on drugs, right? The Rockefeller drug laws that started out in New York in the early 70s and then expanded to the rest of the country. Just Say No, Ronald Reagan, all of that started with him. And he was a Republican, but he was what they called a Rockefeller Republican, an old money, New England, Eastern establishment Republican. The kind of Republicans that were, forced out of the Republican Party during the Goldwater years. It's very interesting to trace the politics of the Eastern establishment, the ultra-rich monopolists in the United States. But another similar case on the other side of the country, was, I believe, what year was it? 1993, 1994, 92, the Waco, the incident, the siege of Waco. That was in what? The Waco siege. That was, when was that? 1993, right? So 1993, in 1993, you had a situation where you had this religious group that had, they had a compound in Texas, and there were a number of people living there, not that many people living there, and they were accused of illegally selling firearms. That they had been selling firearms without a license. And so there was a standoff. And after, weeks of negotiation, they ended the negotiations and they just went in with guns blazing. And they shot a canister of flammable tear gas. And just like at Attica, the women and children that were killed, they tried to claim that they had committed mass suicide. But later it was revealed they didn't commit mass suicide. They were burned alive by the flammable tear gas that was shot by the Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms, and Tobacco, the division of the U.S. Department of Justice that enforces gun laws. And that, that the people they were supposedly going in to protect, right? That was why they were having this standoff, was that, there were women and children in the building and they wanted a peaceful end to the standoff. They were supposedly protecting them, but they ended up burning them alive. And only a few people escaped from the Waco compound. And then that revealed kind of what was revealed at Attica State, what's been revealed in Palestine and Gaza recently, that in some cases, the state, the government saying we're in charge, might is right, trumps any desire they have to protect the people they're supposedly protecting, the hostages, right? Israel says it wants to protect these hostages. Well, it just killed 3 of them. I don't think it killed them intentionally, but it killed them with disregard because they're not in Gaza to protect the hostages and rescue them. They're in Gaza to show the Palestinians that they have the superior firepower, that they're the boss, that they, and that's what they're really there. And so if their own hostages get killed, they don't care. Just like at Waco, they weren't really trying to protect the women and children of the compound there. They were trying to show the religious group that didn't have the right gun license or whatever. They were trying to show them that that they're the boss, right? I mean, the Move bombing, 1985, the Move House bombing in Philadelphia. There was a group called Move, which is the Move organization. Which is a religious group, Black liberation organization. Similar thing. They firebombed the place that they lived, killed a number of children and such. And the whole standoff was based on supposedly protecting the women and children inside the compound, inside the house. It was just a house on a street corner in Philadelphia. I've actually been there. I visited the site of the Move House bombing of 1985. There's many examples of this. And what's interesting, and I have paid a lot of attention to this. If you read Where is America Going? In the 3rd chapter, I talk about this concept of fourth generation warfare, right? 4GW, fourth generation warfare. This is a term coined by William S. Lind. And William S. Lind is a Pentagon strategist who became prominent in what they called the surge in Iraq. Do you remember the surge, right? So first, the USA went in with shock and awe. And after a couple of years, Iraq remained unstable. U.S. troops kept dying. And so in Bush's 2nd term, he announced he was going to do the surge in Iraq. And later we found out what the surge was. It wasn't so much a surge of military weaponry. It was a financial surge that the U.S. government was just buying off these various Iraqi leaders, right? There were these various armed groups in Iraq. Some of them were Shia Muslims that were sympathetic to Iran. Some of them were Saudi Wahhabis that were, getting funding from Saudi Arabia and were killing Shia and didn't want Iranian influence in Iraq and didn't like the Shia majority of Iraq that, was coming to power in the overthrow of the Ba'athist government. And in addition to that, some of them were Baathists. A very small minority were still loyal to Saddam Hussein and Baathist Arab socialism. And there were various armed groups throughout Iraq. And so William S. Lind, who's a very conservative evangelical Christian, he was one of the Pentagon guys who was involved in strategizing the U.S., kind of going in and fighting and trying to stabilize Iraq with the surge. And you can read some of his military writings about fourth generation warfare, where he basically argued that the reason that the USA lost in Vietnam and the reason that insurgencies are so successful around the world, he actually makes this analogy in the book, and I quote it in Where is America Going? He talks about how, he said, you have to imagine like, a child. You have a little child and you have an adult just starts beating this little child in a very public place. No matter how much the child deserves it or how bad the child has been, eventually other adults are going to step in and protect the child. Why? Because the parent or the adult is so much stronger than the child. Everyone is going to sympathize with the child, right? And he makes the analogy. He says, in the thousands of years, people have been telling the story of David and Goliath. How many people have sympathized with Goliath? Very few, right? And that a modern army, a modern massive army going up against a non-state actor, a civilian or, a non-governmental force, right, is going to get sympathy, right? And I mean, that's the Palestinians. The whole world right now is cheering for the Palestinians because they see that Israel is this brutal occupier. They're going in there and they're killing 20,000 people, right? In response to, 1,700 people being killed on October 7th, many of which, it turns out, were actually killed by the Israeli military, not killed by Hamas, many of which we now find out were not civilians, but they were military personnel or they were, police officers, etc. But regardless, right, Israel's going in there with this massive force, with this huge military, and the population is fighting back. And just the natural instinct of human beings is going to be to support the Palestinians, right? And he talks about this. William S. Lind talks about this and how that is why the USA lost in Vietnam, is that people tend to sympathize with the underdog, right? And when you have a massive army going up against a guerrilla insurgency, people are just going to sympathize naturally with the insurgency. And so William S. Lind, he talks about how in Northern Ireland, the British, they followed the military strategies of a guy named Frank Kitson. And the British military actually received more casualties from the IRA than it directly inflicted. And that led to the ultimate victory of the British Army and the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, right? The IRA ultimately surrendered and signed the Good Friday Agreement. Now, what William S. Lynn doesn't get into exactly, but you can learn from reading about Frank Kitson, who was the main military strategist who directed British military strategy in Northern Ireland, is that the way the British were able to win in Northern Ireland and get the Good Friday Agreement signed was what they did is instead of fighting the IRA themselves, they began arming covertly, giving guns and weapons to Protestant extremists in Northern Ireland. The Orange Order, various Ulster nationalist forces, forces that very much hate Catholics, were getting armed by the British government, and they would murder IRA people. And then the IRA would strike back against them or against targets in the strongholds of Protestant extremism. And that changed the nature of the conflict. Suddenly, it wasn't the British Empire versus Ireland. Suddenly, it was much more blatantly an ethnic conflict, Catholics versus Protestants. And nobody likes the idea of an ethnic war, right? White people and black people killing each other, Muslims and Jews killing each other, Protestants and Catholics killing each other, right? And so by redirecting it to be the Protestant gangs fighting the IRA, they could then have the Vatican, which never really supported the IRA. I mean, the IRA tend to be from Roman Catholic communities, but there were many great Protestant freedom fighters in Irish history, Wolfe Tone among them. And the IRA always said no religious test. That was what they said, no religious test. The IRA was not a Catholic organization. However, because the Catholics were the working class communities that were oppressed, the land had been seized by the Protestants, it tended to be Roman Catholics that joined the IRA. Because of that, they could make it, the Ulster Protestant gangs fighting the Catholic IRA, and then they could have the Vatican come in and say, can't we all just get along? And they would have marches for peace through the parks where the Protestant neighborhood and the Catholic neighborhood would march for peace through the neighborhood. And, they would have a Catholic priest and a Protestant minister lead their congregations. And they gradually created a situation where the tone became, can't we all just get along? Can't Protestants and Catholics just get along? And that ultimately led to the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. And it was very effective, right? If they had just kept it as the British military going in and fighting the IRA, people would have sympathized with the IRA, but they made it an ethnic fight by using what you can call counter gangs, right? By using fanatical groups that are not technically government, by covertly backing and arming various groups, they were able to do that. Another thing that's been revealed is that there were some of the bombings that were blamed on the IRA were not actually done by the IRA. There were a couple bombings that were done in the name of supporting the IRA, that were done by Trotskyite organizations, that were done by weird extremist groups, right? And they were bombings that killed civilians, bombings that terrified people, and that was another tactic where they could alienate the population, right? And the funding of various weird extremist groups, that kind of countered the IRA. Took the position that the IRA were not revolutionary enough, not true socialists. That was another way of isolating the IRA, right? Because the IRA was not only having to fight the British government and the Protestant gangs, they're now having to fight weird ultra-left groups, weird Trotskyites and Maoists and others, that were confusing everybody. It was a very effective tactic. And this is what William S. Lind and Frank Kitson talk about, right? When you're waging an insurgency, you never want to have that David and Goliath scenario. Because if that David and Goliath scenario continues long enough, eventually the whole world is going to be on the side of David against Goliath, right? After a while. And on top of that, the whole civilian population is going to side with David against Goliath. They're going to side with Robin Hood against the Sheriff of Nottingham. That's just the way that human beings are. And that's what William S. Lind talks about in the book. And he talks about all kinds of ways that an occupying army cannot corner itself into the situation of being David fighting Goliath. How can an occupying army not be the Sheriff of Nottingham against Robin Hood? And there's various ways of doing it. And one of the ways is just buying off insurgent groups. Just hand out cash, right? Just go to the insurgent group with a big suitcase full of money and say, hey, if you don't shoot my guys, we'll have an agreement. If you don't shoot one of my guys, here's a suitcase full of money. You know, and we know in Afghanistan, for example, American companies were making deals with the Taliban. Walmart, I believe, was sitting down with the Taliban, and they would go meet with the Taliban and they say, hey, we know you're at war with the Americans. We know we're an American company, but, you know, here's a couple $1,000,000. And if you don't blow up these stores that are built with our contracts, we'll have a deal. And this was going on. And this is very blatant. The very same Taliban military that was killing American soldiers in Afghanistan, we know, was sitting down with Walmart, sitting down with Amazon, sitting down with big corporations and making a deal to you know, to not attack certain people, to attack other people. It was just pretty horrendous stuff, pretty awful. You know, but you know, and I mean, it kind of shows at this point how dishonest the leaders of the United States can really be. I mean, you know, if you know, they're allowing U.S. soldiers to die, but you know, Amazon can sit down with the Taliban and make a deal with the enemy, you know, unauthorized. I mean, it's really wild, and that just shows you. I mean, this is capitalism gone mad. I talk about how the ultra rich are not all on the same team at this point. They're fighting among themselves, and you know, there's rivalries in the ruling class. These are things that I talk about a lot on these streams. So this is something we're all aware of, but when we think about the Israeli hostages who got killed, the main thing to take away from this is that, you know, you can be sure, you know, the Israeli military, they have read Frank Kitson. They have read William S. Lind. They don't want to be Goliath fighting David, right? They know that that is how a counterinsurgency fails, right? That if the counterinsurgency sets itself up in a situation where it's them versus, you know, the colonized people, they lose. They know that. And they know that the way the British were able to defeat the Land and Freedom Army in Kenya, they know that ultimately the way they were able to do it was by, you know, creating these counter gangs, by confusing the population, the Black African population, into who to support, you know, and also eventually by just rounding up big sections of the population and putting them into like mini prison camps. They also know that the way that the British were able to win in Northern Ireland was largely because of the fact that they were able to confuse the population, you know, and you know, make it versus, you know, make it so it wasn't the British military directly fighting and all of that. I will add, probably the biggest factor in the signing of the Good Friday Agreement was the fall of the Soviet Union. Right? I mean, I'll just point that out. Right? The Soviet Union was a huge supporter of the Irish freedom struggle, a big supporter of the IRA, and the Soviet Union fell, right? And, you know, that, I mean, you know, there's many revolutionary struggles around the world that took a retreat after the fall of the Soviet Union. And one of them was the Irish freedom struggle. I mean, the IRA, they signed the Good Friday Agreement in the mid-90s after the fall of the Soviet Union. You know, in South Africa, right? You know, apartheid fell, but they were going to go directly to socialism. They were going to establish a socialist government in South Africa. But then they were in a situation where that would have led to civil war. And without the Soviet Union to have their back, you know, the ANC was not ready to have a civil war. And so, you know, the South African movement, you know, they have an anti-imperialist state there, and you know, there's a lot of business with China and stuff, but they didn't end up having a full seizure of power, etc. There wasn't a change in property relations largely in South Africa, despite the huge amount of investment from China that ties to socialist countries. You know, El Salvador and Nicaragua are both two countries. You know, in Nicaragua, they had an election and the Sandinistas lost and they stepped down, right? And El Salvador, you know, we saw a similar situation. So, you know, the fall of the Soviet Union was a devastating loss for many national liberation struggles. And what we're seeing now is that Israel has been unable to not fall into that David and Goliath trap. The whole world sees them massacring civilians, just massacring civilians in Gaza. The whole world sees that and is sympathizing with the Palestinians. And even Joe Biden, I thought this was hilarious. I don't know if you saw. I mean, I shouldn't say hilarious. None of this is funny. People are dying, but it's pathetically sad. The Biden White House, a bunch of the staffers from Biden's administration had a little protest in front of the White House with signs that said, White House staffers call for a ceasefire. Did you see this? I saw this. And I thought, nice try, Biden. Folks, if you work at the White House and you go out in front of the White House and protest something the president's doing, you don't go back to work on Monday, you're fired. Unless they told you to do that, which is exactly what happened. I am very, very, very confident that this was planned. Biden is basically losing any credibility that he or the Democratic Party have had in the Muslim world right now. I mean, it is gone, right? You know, the whole talking point of the Democrats, they go to the Middle East and it's like, sure, we support Israel, but the Republicans are way worse. But Trump would be way worse. Any ability to say that on the part of the Biden administration is out the window right now. You know, I referred to Barack Obama as, you know, a modern day Napoleon. You all know about this. When Napoleon went to go colonize Egypt and Syria for the French, he put up posters everywhere claiming that he was a Muslim. He said, I am a Muslim. The poster said, I come to restore your rights, right? And that Barack Obama was a 21st century Napoleon. He faked out the Muslim world, right? His middle name was Hussein. He met with Edward Said. He hated Netanyahu. Netanyahu and him didn't like each other. And he faked out the Muslim world. I'm one of you. I can understand you. And that was very strategic for the United States. The Arab Spring happened the way it did because you had a president, the first black man to ever be president of the United States. And his middle name was Hussein, right? And he'd gone to a Muslim school when he was a kid in Indonesia. And the fact that they were constantly accusing him of being a Muslim on Fox News really helped the United States in the Middle East because Bush had alienated the Muslim world. Well, Barack Obama was trying to repair that relationship. And, you know, Barack Obama's whole argument is, sure, I support Israel, but, you know, I have to or whatever, but, you know, I'm way better than those Republicans. You know, and that's their argument. Even though Obama's never been a Muslim, we all know that, right? I mean, he's a member of the United Church of Christ in Chicago, Reverend Jeremiah Wright. That's the congregation I grew up in, UCC. It's just a mainline Protestant church. That's what he's a member of. I think Barack Obama's probably an atheist, right? I don't think he believes in anything. But, you know, I mean, he professes to be a Christian. He had a Christian wedding. He has a Christian pastor. He's a member of a Christian church. And that church, that's the church that Oprah is a member of. It is the church in Chicago that is for the wealthiest members of the Black community, right? It is the upper middle class to upper class big church in Chicago. It's the Black church for wealthy folks in Chicago, and that's Barack Obama's stated religious background. I think he's probably an atheist personally, but I mean, that's between him and God. I don't care about Barack Obama's beliefs, but Barack Obama, right? You know, Barack Obama was never a Muslim, but he faked out the Muslim world. And that's what the Democrats always do. We're your friends. You know, yeah, we don't help you, Palestinians. Yeah, we don't help you, Muslim world, but look how bad the Republicans are. Look how bad the Republicans are. But at this point, they can't say that because what's happening right now didn't happen under Trump. Right? As bad as Trump was, Trump did move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. Yeah, Donald Trump did. You know, he did, you know, get, what is it? With the Abraham Accords, he got like three Muslim countries to recognize Israel, like United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and I think Morocco, right? He got them to recognize Israel. And Donald Trump beat his chest about how much he hated Muslims and he hated all, but this didn't happen under Donald Trump. This is happening under Biden. And Biden very much needs to do anything he possibly can to preserve any credibility that he has in the Muslim world. And I think it's gone. I don't think there's any hope for that. This is actually very similar to what happened with Bill Clinton. Little known fact. Nobody talks about this, but the majority of Muslim Americans voted for George W. Bush in the year 2000, right? Muslim Americans voted, and before 9/11, they voted for George W. Bush because Bill Clinton had done so badly in the Middle East, right? He had done so badly with the horrendous sanctions he put on Iraq and all of that. And you know, it was weird. You know, I used to work with Ramsey Clark and he had the International Action Center. And they told me about how weird it was that there were people that donated to the International Action Center because Ramsey Clark was stopping the sanctions on Iraq or was opposing the sanctions on Iraq and was going on friendship missions to Iraq. They donated some of their money to Ramsey Clark and some of it to the Bush campaign, right? And that the majority of Muslims voted for Bush in the 2000 election because Clinton had alienated and disappointed the Muslim American community so much. Now, obviously, Bush came in, 9/11 happened, axis of evil, and Bush, and then it was the Democrats who were supporting. Well, the Democrats are trying to hold on to that, right? And they know this, right? The Democrats know this, right? That Rashida Tlaib, censuring her and condemning her, she was doing them a huge favor. But it wasn't enough. And this little protest that I'm sure the Biden administration planned, the White House staff sat down there and said, okay, we have to keep supporting Israel. We have to just keep giving Israel a blank check and protecting them at the United Nations. We have to keep sending them all the weapons they want. We have to have Biden just continue to blindly support what Israel's doing, but we got to do something to show that we still have some support for the Muslim world. So I am confident, right? I don't know. The White House doesn't tell me these things. I have to guess, obviously. I am very, very confident, very, very confident that this was an inside job rally, right? That they did it to gain face, right? The fact they're not firing these people who did this, the Democratic Party, all of the credibility that Barack Obama gave them is gone. And I've talked about that on previous streams. What the Democrats did, divide the Muslim world between Sunnis and Shias, polarize the Muslim world, get a lot of jihadists to go to Libya and Syria to fight on the same side the United States was on in regime change wars, all gone, all withered away. The Democratic Party and the Muslim community have parted ways, right? And it's interesting because there were some hints that this might be the case before, right? One thing that many people pointed to is that at some of these protests by concerned parents, conservative parents who don't want their kids looking at transgender books or LGBT books in school, not only did you have evangelical conservative Christians, you also had Muslims, right? And I think in Detroit, you have a lot of Muslims in Detroit. Dearborn, Michigan is like the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the country, right? And in addition to that, in Detroit and also in Michigan and in San Francisco and elsewhere, you had a number of Muslim Americans who were coming out, on the side of Republicans against the school board. And I think this will continue. And as the Republicans play up the idea that they are very much the party of social conservatism and that they're kind of an anti-war party, I think we're going to see more Muslim Americans that vote Republican. During the 1980s, there were a number of Muslim Americans who voted Republican. People remember when the famous boxer Muhammad Ali endorsed Ronald Reagan in 1984. Do people remember this? 1984 presidential election. Ronald Reagan is running for re-election against Walter Mondale. And Muhammad Ali, who is this, he refused to fight in Vietnam. He converted to Islam. He was in the Nation of Islam. Muhammad Ali, who's considered to be a leftist, a black nationalist, an anti-war, anti-imperialist voice, he endorsed Ronald Reagan. And the press conference he gave was very vague. And he said, I'm endorsing Ronald Reagan. He said he wants to keep prayer in school, and that's enough. And it was a very brief endorsement. It was a very strange, brief endorsement. It was a little press conference from Muhammad Ali, and he endorsed Ronald Reagan. I wonder if there's any video of it I can find. It was a very weird press conference. That Muhammad Ali gave endorsing Ronald Reagan. Let me see if I can find it. I cannot find it. I can't find it online. I can't find footage of it. But regardless, it was a very weird moment. But what was really going on there, and this is fascinating, right? So Muhammad Ali, right, when he was a boxer, he was a member of the Nation of Islam. And he was a good friend with Malcolm X. We know that Malcolm X had a falling out with the Nation of Islam. He felt that he felt that Elijah Muhammad, who was the founder of the Nation of Islam, that, Malcolm X would begin his speeches in the name of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Well, he found out, he alleged that the Elijah Muhammad had fathered children outside of wedlock. And he had a beef with the founder of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad. So Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam. Muhammad Ali stayed in the Nation of Islam, right? And so, Muhammad Ali was loyal to Elijah Muhammad. And when Malcolm X was killed, Muhammad Ali stayed with Elijah Muhammad. And Elijah Muhammad died, okay? Elijah Muhammad died. And after Elijah Muhammad died, Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad became the leader of the Nation of Islam. And Wallace Muhammad converted the Nation of Islam to Sunniism, right? And he became funded by Saudi Arabia. Wallace Muhammad got funding from Saudi Arabia and shifted the Nation of Islam away from black nationalism towards Sunniism, toward Wahhabi Sunniism. That was a big shift. And they basically said that all of the kind of unique beliefs of the Nation of Islam about the special spiritual place of black people in world history, etc., they kind of threw those off. And they became, Saudi Wahhabis. And Saudi Arabia supported Ronald Reagan because they are, big oil and weapons. And the Saudis loved Ronald Reagan. They were hard right-wing conservatives, and they supported Reagan. So he was in the what was previously called the Nation of Islam, but it was called, I think it was called like the Islamic Organization of America, something like that. It was the former Nation of Islam. He was in that. Now, what's interesting is in about 1978, Louis X, who was a minister in the Nation of Islam, Louis X was just a better speaker than Wallace Muhammad. And the family of Elijah Muhammad didn't like Louis X because he was a good speaker, because he was charismatic, because he also believed in Elijah Muhammad's teachings, even after they repudiated them. There were threats of murder, I guess. According to Minister Farrakhan, they threatened to kill him. There was fear that they might take him out. So Louis X left the Islamic Organization of America. And in 1978, he refounded the Nation of Islam. He took the old name back, the the Nation of Islam. And he refounded the Nation of Islam, and they got a loan from Gaddafi. That Gaddafi was an anti-imperialist. The Saudis were pro-imperialist. They were, basically puppets of the West. They were funding Wallace Muhammad, and he made the Nation of Islam into Sunni Muslims. But Minister Farrakhan got a loan from Gaddafi, and he was an anti-imperialist. He liked Castro, and he liked Cuba, and he liked anti-imperialism. So the Nation of Islam was restarted by Minister Louis Farrakhan, who was previously known as Louis X. It's very interesting history, the history of the Nation of Islam. But the Nation of Islam, when it was restarted by Louis X or Louis Farrakhan, they were Democrats. They were very solidly Democrats. They backed Jesse Jackson's campaign in 1984, which was a very historic presidential campaign. In 1984, Jesse Jackson ran for president of the United States, and his platform in 1984 was a socialist platform. He wanted to end support for Israel, recognize the Palestinians. He wanted to guarantee health care. He wanted a national health care system. He wanted to end all U.S. support for South Africa. He wanted to abolish nuclear weapons. He was running on a very socialistic platform. And what is kind of an amazing story is in Michigan, many white workers voted for Jesse Jackson. And that was because of the work that the Workers' World Party did. The Workers' World Party endorsed Jesse Jackson in the 1984 Democratic primary. And they were involved in the movement to stop home plants from closing in Michigan. And that was, Michael Moore showed that in his movie Roger and Me and stuff. And the Workers' World Party got a lot of white workers in Michigan who lost their jobs in Flint and in auto plants to vote for Jesse Jackson. But Minister Louis Farrakhan was a big supporter of Jesse Jackson and was an advisor on Jesse Jackson's presidential campaign. And the 1984 presidential campaign of Jesse Jackson was very much a socialist campaign, and black nationalists were involved, etc. However, the old Nation of Islam that had changed its name to the Islamic Organization of America, they were Republicans. They were black Republicans, and they focused on prayer in school. They focused on opposing abortion, opposing gay marriage. And so they endorsed Ronald Reagan. So it was kind of a weird election where in 1984, you have Jesse Jackson and Minister Louis Farrakhan in the Democratic Party. And then you have Muhammad Ali in the Republican Party. And that was because of the fact that, one section of the Nation of Islam had gotten support from Saudi Arabia, and they had become, Wahhabis and Republicans tied to Saudi Arabia. And another section of the Nation of Islam had restarted under the charismatic leadership of Minister Louis Farrakhan. And they had been supporters of anti-imperialism and tied to Libya and Gaddafi, and they were anti-imperialists. Very important history, very, very important history, right? I wish people could understand that, right? That there's a lot more to these things. They teach you how to understand these things. Jyoti Brar, she had a great analogy when she was speaking at our event in Oregon. She said they teach us that if only Hitler had been a better painter, World War II would never have happened. Right. And that's how they want us to understand history. There's good people and bad people. There's different personalities. And no, if you're a Marxist, you understand history in terms of material forces, right? Which material forces are there? Well, 1984, that presidential election, right? You had different material forces. You had Saudi Arabia, which is the leading vassal state of Western imperialism and colonialism. It's basically the British and American oil companies' oil plantation and the big purchaser of American weapons. They were tied in with one group of black Muslims. And because they were financing and tied in with one group of black Muslims, that group of black Muslims were backing the establishment, the neocons, which was Ronald Reagan. However, you then had another group of black Muslims that were tied to the anti-imperialist camp. They were tied to Gaddafi, who was the leader of a socialist country that Ronald Reagan had bombed, right? Ronald Reagan murdered Gaddafi's daughter. Did you know this? Gaddafi's daughter actually died from bombs that were dropped on Libya by Ronald Reagan. And so, you have a group of black nationalists who are supporters of Gaddafi and supporters of the anti-imperialist camp. And so they are supporting Jesse Jackson, who was the voice of anti-imperialism within the Democratic Party that year. Very, very fascinating history that we all should really understand. It's very, very important stuff. And, if we can understand the contending forces that exist there, then you also have the Workers' World Party, which is a Marxist-Leninist organization. But they very much represent and were tied in with, North Korea, Cuba, Gaddafi's Libya. They were tied in with the countries in the Soviet camp that were more radical, right? And the Communist Party that was tied directly to the Soviet Union, the official bona fide Communist Party, they just supported Walter Mondale and the Democrats. But the Workers' World Party that was more radical, they were with Farrakhan, and they endorsed Jesse Jackson in 1984 because they represented the more radical wing of the Soviet camp, right? Very interesting. And then when Jesse Jackson did not get the nomination in 1984, they ran their own presidential campaign in 1984. I forget who they ran for president that year. These are important things to understand. There are different class forces, right? And you need to understand things in terms of the different class forces. And what I think was the genius of the Workers' World Party in those years is that in Michigan, I don't know about anywhere else, but in Michigan in particular, they had a class line. Right? They weren't telling people to vote for Jesse Jackson because racism is bad. They were telling people to vote for Jesse Jackson because it was in their material interest. And they got a number of low-income white workers who had just lost their jobs in the auto plants to vote for Jesse Jackson, to vote for the same candidate that was backed by Minister Farrakhan, because he was the candidate who had an economic program of socialism, right? And Jesse Jackson won the state of Michigan in the Democratic primary in 1984. That's a big deal, right? This guy's running on a basically socialist anti-imperialist platform, right? He's supporting Nelson Mandela. He's supporting the Palestinians. He's calling for a national health care service. He's far more radical than Bernie Sanders was. The Jesse Jackson campaign of 1984 was like Bernie Sanders, except it was far less popular, right? It got way less support. But it also was anti-imperialist. It was pro-Palestinian, which back then nobody was pro-Palestinian. It was pro-Nelson Mandela, which back then was kind of a fringe issue. Nelson Mandela is now lauded as a hero, but back then the USA called him a terrorist. They considered the ANC to be a terrorist group backed and armed by the Soviet Union. So to have a U.S. state vote for the communist candidate in the Democratic primary, that's a big deal, right? That's a very, very big deal to have the entire state of Michigan in the Democratic primary give its backing to Jesse Jackson. Now, we know that Jesse Jackson drifted to the right. In 1988, when he ran, he wasn't radical. He wasn't revolutionary when he ran in 88. And, Jesse Jackson politically deteriorated after that. But in 1984, the Jesse Jackson campaign was very much a socialist, anti-imperialist campaign. There's a book, I think I've got it over here. It's on the history of the new communist movement of the 1970s. I think I've got it. It's called Revolution in the Air by Max Elbaum. Yeah, this is the book, Revolution in the Air by Max Elbaum. And this book talks about how, as the new communist movement of the 1970s was declining, the Jesse Jackson campaign was where a lot of them went, right? As DSA, Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, or it was later Democratic Socialists of America, was picking up a lot of the former Maoist communists. A lot of them went into the Jesse Jackson campaign. You have to also remember that in these days, Detroit had a mayor who was very much somebody who had been friendly to the new communist movement. Coleman Young had been kind of a friend and fellow traveler of the Communist Party USA. He was friendly with some of the Maoist groups, and he was the mayor of Detroit up into the 90s. And that Harold Washington, what year was it that Harold Washington became the mayor of Chicago? And Harold Washington was also kind of a Marxist. He wasn't a member of the Communist Party, but he became mayor, of Chicago in 1983. So around that time. So, this is before and it's after the 1984 presidential election, which Ronald Reagan won in a landslide, right? You have to remember the Democrats still had a left in the early 80s. There was room for people like Harold Washington and Coleman Young and the 1984 Jesse Jackson campaign. There was still room for them in the Democratic Party in those years. But it was after the 1984 election when the Democrats just got pummeled because there was a big labor aristocracy in those years, right? The living standards of the bulk of the U.S. population was still very high because of imperialism, and they didn't want to hear what communists and radicals had to say. They didn't support the anti-imperialist countries. And so, Ronald Reagan won in a landslide. And that's when you had the rise of what they called the Democrat Leadership Council, the DLC, right? Do folks know about the DLC, the Democrat Leadership Council? And that was the campaign or the organization of Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton and his friends, they started trying to purge the Democratic Party of the far left. And drive out people like Jesse Jackson, like Coleman Young, like Harold Washington. And it very much parallels New Labor in Britain. Tony Blair very much paralleled that. The Labor Party, even today, claims falsely to be a socialist party. Well, back in the 1980s, the Labor Party actually said they had what they called Clause 4 of their bylaws or constitution that said that they wanted to eventually have socialism in Britain. It was a lie. They were a pro-imperialist party, but Tony Blair came in, and the Blairites in Britain and the DLC Democrats in the United States, they pushed the politics. Oh, we got a Rockfin tip from Hempcar. You're on the list. They pushed the politics of the Democratic Party to the right. But that's why I still give credit to Lyndon LaRouche, right? Because as much as, the LaRouche movement, there's things we disagree with there, they had a point, right? The LaRouche movement made a very important point in these years. I'm going to pull up, since we're talking about this, of all things, we started talking about Israeli hostages and all of this, and now we're talking about the 1980s presidential election. But let's pull it up. Let's pull it up here, right? This is the ad that won the election in 1984 for Ronald Reagan. And this is an important advertisement, right? It's not the only ad. Ronald Reagan, things were just on his side, but I'm going to show you this ad. And, it's an ad that, obviously, I don't agree with it, but it's a very clever advertisement, and it kind of explains why you saw a surge of neoconservatism in the 1980s, right? It's very similar to the kind of propaganda that Margaret Thatcher was running during the same years. And I'm going to put this ad on. Because this ad, this was the ad that kind of summed up why, is it this ad itself that won the election for Reagan? You can't say that, but this is the sentiments. This ad has the sentiments of what won the election for Ronald Reagan. It's a famous advertisement that was just considered it by Ronald Reagan supporters to be, this was the pinnacle of the Reagan era, was this ad. I'm going to put it on. I'm going to put on this famous ad. Right, this famous, presidential campaign ad from Ronald Reagan in 1984.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes. More lower than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
Yeah, well, what that ad was celebrating was that there was more wealth in the United States in the 80s, and that the Democrats had associated themselves with the degrowth policies of the Carter administration. Jimmy Carter was actively deindustrializing the United States and was actively pushing policies of just trying to wreck the U.S. economy. When the energy crisis hit during the Jimmy Carter administration, he told Americans they should wear a sweater instead of turning up the heat. Jimmy Carter, he gave his famous malaise speech. Folks remember the malaise speech? It was Jimmy Carter, his response to an economic downturn. His response to it was to basically give a speech to the American people against consumerism, right? And tell them that they should be happy being poorer because owning things will not give them satisfaction. And that the Democrats very much became the party of degrowth and the idea that it's better to be poorer, and that it's more important to be equal than it is to have wealth. Whereas the message of the Republicans was, with us, we can create a lot of wealth. With us, we will create the ability for people to be wealthy. Jimmy Carter got in with the more Malthusian wing of the ultra rich, and the Carter administration was disastrous economically. Here I'll put on. This is what Jimmy Carter. Imagine, right? People all over the country are losing their jobs. Interest rates are through the roof. It's very hard to get a loan to set up your new home. And the president of the United States is supposed to get on and say, "This is my plan to fix the country," and instead he says this.
Good evening. It's clear that the true problems of our nation are much deeper than gasoline lines or energy shortages, deeper even than inflation or recession. In a nation that was proud of hard work, strong families, close-knit communities, too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption. Human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns. But we've discovered that owning things and consuming things does not satisfy our longing for meaning. We've learned that piling up material goods cannot fill the emptiness of lives which have no confidence or purpose. This is not a message of happiness or reassurance, but it is the truth, and it is a warning.
Yeah, and he's not wrong in what he's saying, right? I mean, consumerism isn't going to bring happiness, right? That's the story of the 90s, right? The 90s, there's so many of these movies, right? You watch how many of these 90s kids movies, Mrs. Doubtfire, Home Alone, Hook, all these 90s kids movies are about some very, very wealthy family where there's not love, right? And there's some ugly divorce, or there's I think Liar, Liar, Jim Carrey. You look at all these 90s movies, they're all about how there's some very, very wealthy upper middle class family. I mean, look at the house in the movie Home Alone. Good night. I mean, that's a hugely expensive house, right? I mean, that's not the house that a typical Chicago family is living in, for Christ's sakes. But, it's about some wealthy family that has all this money but does not have love, right? So, I mean, these things existed, right? And even in the good times, there was something psychologically unwell in America, right? I mean, so he's not wrong. Jimmy Carter was not wrong in what he's saying there. And not wrong at all. But if you're having an economic downturn And if people are worried about getting a mortgage to move in, and if people are worried about paying their bills and they're losing their jobs, and the president decides to get on TV and give you a lecture about, how, you shouldn't be concerned with material things and all of that, it comes off as insensitive to your situation. And basically, starting with what they call the new left, leftism stopped being about working class power and mobilizing the working class to oppose the imperialists and to organize to seize the means of production. And instead, it became this like moralistic critique of the idea that human beings have too much and that we need to go back to nature and we need to be poorer, and that, and it became a worship of things that are primitive. It became anti-human, the belief that human beings are a cancer on Mother Earth, on nature, and that the Democratic Party shifted into this. It was really the ideology of the ultra-rich, of the Rockefellers, of the British Empire, the ultra-rich. It was their ideology that came to dominate what they call leftism in the United States, right? And because of that, a lot of the population said, I don't want to be poorer, right? And the message of the Democratic Party, not always directly stated, but some cases less than subtle, was, we think that you should be poorer. And a lot of Americans said, I don't want to hear that. And especially Americans who could remember the 50s and the post-World War II economic expansion. They said, I don't want to hear that. And that led to the surge of right-wing politics in the West, with Margaret Thatcher in Britain and with Ronald Reagan. And that's why I give Lyndon LaRouche some credit, right? As Lyndon LaRouche was a Marxist. He was a Trotskyite Marxist in the 1970s who discovered that, right? And he raised the alarm about how leftism was becoming synonymous with degrowth economics and how that was a trap. And he was right. He was absolutely right about that. Now, I think he went a little too far with it. I could never back Ronald Reagan, right? But, LaRouche was so against the degrowth and those kind of politics, he backed Reagan. Now, I think, Trump is a different story because we're in a different time period. But, LaRouche kind of saw what was coming. He saw that leftism was stepping away from Marxism and labor politics, and leftism was becoming more and more about anti-humanism and degrowth and control and social engineering, which is, that's now, if you listen to any right-wing commentator, Alex Jones, I did a thing on Alex Jones, yesterday, right? That right-wing commentators, when they talk about Klaus Schwab and you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, that's what the working class doesn't want to hear. They don't want to be socially engineered by a group of Malthusian technocrats who say it's better to be poor. It's better to be poor, and they want to run your life, and they want you to be poorer and be happy with being poorer because that's what the environment needs, and they know better than you. People don't want that, right? People want to start their own business. People want their kids to have a higher living standard than they had before. And that the Democrats are increasingly that managerial bourgeoisie, whereas Republicans are the more entrepreneurial wing that says, look, we want to go out and build. And that's what I give LaRouche credit for. And so when I think about the 80s, right, and I think about Carter versus Reagan, you'll remember Jimmy Carter went after what they called the smokestack Democrats, the Democrats that were tied to labor unions, abscam, they called it, or where they had, it's in the movie American Hustle. If you see American Hustle, that's a great movie. That fictionalizes it, but it shows they dressed up a guy in a costume like he was an Arab sheik and tried to buy off a bunch of senators. It was an FBI sting to get rid of a wing of the Democratic Party that was tied to labor unions, tied to the Teamsters Union, tied to labor unions that didn't believe in degrowth. Labor Democrats, smokestack Democrats, industrialist Democrats who tended to be urban Catholics and tended to be tied to labor unions. They purged them, right? And that the degrowth politics really, really cemented itself in the Democratic Party during the Carter administration, right? And then during the Clinton, the rise of the DLC and Bill Clinton, it got worse, right? The DLC was basically purging anyone who wasn't a believer in austerity and free market economics, right? They went after anything social democratic in the Democratic Party. It's all very interesting, but this actually relates to the topic of the stream tonight about the Israeli hostages. And the reason that it relates is that, Israel has tried to be more managerial, to not be in the David and Goliath situation. They've tried to step back and let the Palestinians fight each other and manipulate things, but they can't do it. Israel is in a position where they're just murdering the Palestinians. 20,000 Palestinians dead already. They're killing their own hostages, and the whole world, except for the United States, except for pro-Israel people, which are a minority, except for them, the whole world is condemning what Israel is doing. So much so that Biden is staging protests from his administration to try and show that there's pro-Palestine people in his administration. Right? Israel, Israel very much it would probably be more strategic and effective for Israel to present itself in a managerial Republican Party or Democratic Party kind of way, but they can't do that. Netanyahu is very much part of that new right that's rising in Europe with Brexit, with Donald Trump in the United States, with the AfD in Germany, and that that the leadership of Israel is blatantly moving in the direction of peace through strength, might is right. We've got a right to murder people, and it's alienating the world. And we're going to see. Coming out of this, I feel like Netanyahu is going to be the big loser here. Right? He may get a lot of support among the Israeli population, but globally, support for Israel is going to decrease. It's already decreasing. Globally, opposition to Israel is rising everywhere. The United States is more isolated than it's been ever. I mean, the fact that the USA is holding out and just refusing a ceasefire, and even people like Bernie Sanders are punking out on this. I mean, this is a moment where the whole base of the Democratic Party is saying Israel is on a killing spree. Now we've got to stop it with a ceasefire. They're killing their own hostages, but yet the Democratic Party is revealing they are so tied to Israel. We're going to have to see how this plays out. We're going to have to see how this plays out. This is going to be a game-changing moment in American politics, I think. And that's why what we're doing at the Center for Political Innovation is so important. Look, if you've been listening to this stream for the last hour or so, you understand that we offer a much deeper level of analysis here, right? We are Marxists and socialists. We understand Marxism, Leninism, and the foundations, but we also understand why the socialist world is not, embracing the politics of yesterday, why there's market socialism now, why Deng Xiaoping theory is so important. We also understand why the Soviet Union is not coming back and why the socialist world is the way it is. We understand that there's a lot of anti-imperialism in the world today that is not Marxist, whether it's the axis of resistance in the Middle East. Iran is the center of anti-imperialism. Bolivarian socialism in the Latin American countries. The world is changing, and we at the Center for Political Innovation, I ended the workshop in Portland, and you're going to see the video. It'll be on the YouTube channel eventually. I ended the workshop that we did for new members by pointing out that we represent the global majority. Right? What we represent, the belief that we can have a world beyond imperialism, that growth is good, and that China and the Belt and Road, and Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union, the wave of anti-imperialism in Africa and West Africa that we've seen in Niger and elsewhere, Bolivarianism in Latin America, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela. We represent the majority. North Korea, People's Korea, right? The Yemeni resistance, and it's fighting Israel. We represent the global majority at this point. We represent the bulk of humanity that believes in growth. And it's our job to show the U.S. working class, the overwhelming majority of the American people, that they would benefit by joining the new economy that is emerging around the world. All right? The Western financial system, imperialism, capitalism in its monopoly stage, as Vladimir Lenin wrote about, is dying. There's a new economy arising around the BRICS, around the Eurasian Economic Union, around the Belt and Road Initiative from China, and that new economy is the future. And we're here to say that is the future of the American working class. That you're not going to tie yourself to Ronald Reagan. That's not your future. You're not going to tie yourself to a dying financial system. You're not going to tie yourself to Israel. You're not going to tie yourself to fighting against China. The future of the American people is not separate from the future of the people of the world, right? There is no independent destiny for the American working class. There's a global class war, and the imperialists are the enemy of all humanity. And the future of the American working class is tied in with the global struggle against imperialism. That is very much our message. We are patriots. We are true American patriots. We love our country, and we love our country enough to say that it's got to break with imperialism if it wants to have a future. Imperialism is unpaving the roads. Imperialism is creating the opioid epidemic. Imperialism is unpaving the roads in your neighborhoods. Imperialism is grinding this country into poverty, is setting up a low-wage service sector economy. Imperialism is the enemy of the American working class. Imperialism is setting up a prison labor-based economy. Imperialism is setting up a situation where people can't afford to live in cities and the rent is rising through the roof. Imperialism is setting up a situation where the wages are getting lower and lower. Imperialism created the student debt trap that's hanging over this economy as a curse. Imperialism is the enemy of all humanity. And the future of the American working class is standing in solidarity with the people of the world against the imperialists. Russia is our friend. China is our friend. Venezuela, Cuba, People's Korea are our friends. Zimbabwe are our friends. South Africa are our friends. The Palestinians are our friends. The Iranians, the Yemenis, the Syrians are our friends. And our enemy, our true enemy, is right here at home. It is the imperialists. That is what we are about. We love our country, and we love Ohio. We love Pennsylvania. We love Texas. We love California. We love Oregon. We love Michigan. We love Utah. We love Idaho. We love Connecticut. We love Florida. We love Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi. We love America. But to really love America, you must oppose imperialism, and you must oppose the rule of the world by the big banks and the corporations. We are 1,000 times more patriotic than any of the phony politicians in the Democratic Party, the Republican Party. We're so patriotic that we're willing to recognize that the only future that this country and the working class here can have is tied in with the people of the world and lies in the defeat of the big monopolies and bankers that are grinding the world into poverty. That is our message here. So I hope you like it. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us here tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe button, and the notifications bell. You guys are great. We have a great community here. You know, we have our textbook, our CPI textbook, right? It's to accompany the Saxton lectures, the basic classes that we give. This will teach you everything you need to know about anti-imperialism, the introduction to our beliefs. And, new people are joining our organization every day. We're at about 140 members, I believe. You'd have to check with Elizabeth Young, our president. She has the specific numbers. We're at about 140 members of the organization, and we're growing. People are growing in big numbers. Craig in Kansas City, Ryan in Kansas City, David in San Jose, JT24 in Mississippi, Meredith and Quinn in Washington, Riverside, California, Patrick in Maine. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Very, very good. We got Jacob in Wisconsin, Hemp Car. He's on the Rockfin. On the Rumble. Do we have anyone on the Rumble? All right. We got Patrick in Maine, Bob Troy in New York, St. Joshua in St. Louis, Sarah in Lewiston, Idaho. Welcome, Sarah. Right. We got San Antonio, Texas, Laura Floyd, Zach Brunch in Richmond, Virginia. Welcome, Zach. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. We will call you all out as we see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Herb Bryant in Tampa, Florida is with us. Welcome, Herb. Good to have you with us, Herb. Good to have you. Good to have you. I know people are anxious to see the video from Portland. We got a team of people that are working very hard on it. I'm sorry about the delay. Alex from Brazil, Augustin Garcia. Welcome, Augustin. Battle Cossack. Good to have you with us. I know people are getting anxious. We'll have that video for you soon. Ellie is in Chicago. Good to have you, Ellie. Ellie is a great member of our group. She's on the Rockfin, and she is in Chicago. She is with us. Ivan Chow, 12, is in Sydney, Australia. Welcome, Ivan Chow. So good to have you with us. Portsmouth, Virginia. Bilbo is in Portsmouth. Chairman Robert is in Hawaii. Shout out to you, Robert. Chris in Salt Lake City. Welcome, Chris. Good to have you. We have a lot of people out west, don't we? Right? Salt Lake City, Idaho. Wow, that's interesting, right? There's something Western about us, right? So there's something about us. Do we jive with Mormon values, or something? I don't know what it is, but it seems like out west we tend to get members. We have members in other places too, right? We got members all over the East Coast. We got members in Pennsylvania. We got members in the Chicago area. We got members in Boston and New York City. And so, that's interesting. We do have, people in Washington, people in Salt Lake City. it's interesting. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notifications bell. Videos coming soon from the Oregon conference, which was a huge, astounding success. I'm very, very excited. We have so many exciting plans for the new year. We are pumped. We are rushing into 2024. We're having our weekly membership meeting tomorrow. We're going to talk about some of those exciting plans. If you haven't joined the CPI, you really ought to join. We got some exciting new memberships that have just come in. There you go. There you go. All right, folks. Well, if you have any more questions that you would like me to answer here in the second half of the program, now would be the time to send in your super chats, to send in your Rumble rants, your Rockfin tips. I am going to start answering your questions here for the second half of the show. The first question that we have, it is on the Rockfin, and it came from Hemp Car. I do Rumble questions first, but I don't see any Rumble rants. So the first was a Rockfin question, and it's from Hemp Car. And he said, Cynthia McKinney and William Pepper said that Jesse was FBI since day one. Jesse Jackson, when you have this feeling that the government is really watching you, taps your telephone, maybe in your first text files, it has a chilling effect. It takes away your freedom. And for leaders, none of us are perfect. It neutralizes people. Well, look, that's not the point, right? I mean, it's not the point, right? The point is that Jesse Jackson's 1984 presidential campaign was the expression. Anybody who was anti-war, anyone who was anti-imperialist, anyone who advocated socialism was with that campaign, right? For the most part. That's what it's about. And this is what I encourage people to get away from. Is it possible Jesse Jackson was an FBI informer from day one? Look, there's a lot of people who say things. Jesse Jackson, there's that famous picture. He was where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was when he was shot, right? There's a picture of him pointing, right? And I think it was the comedian, the famous black, kind of anti-imperialist comedian. And he said, why is he not getting, jumping for cover in case there's another shot? That's a good question, right? If there's a sniper on a rooftop, and that's what supposedly happened. James Earl Ray was on the roof and sniped, took a shot and killed MLK. Why was Jesse Jackson pointing at where the shot was coming from? Why was he not, ducking for cover? That's a fair question, but that's not the point, right? That's not the point. Here, I'll pull up the famous picture. Jesse Jackson pointing, MLK dead. Right? I don't know enough about this. This is something that a lot of conspiracy people get really into. But this is the famous picture. I'll pull it up here of Dr. Martin Luther King, right after he was shot, right? Jesse Jackson and a few other people are pointing, right? They're pointing. I'll put it on the screen here. And this is, I know the comedian, I forget his name, the comedian. If anyone in the chat knows his name, I bet John McCarthy knows his name, but he's probably not watching tonight. He's probably doing something else, but John McCarthy would know his name. But there's a famous African-American comedian who looks at this picture and he says, why are they not ducking for cover? Right? That's MLK dead on the ground. And these people, right? Somebody just shot from the roof of a building and killed MLK. Dick Gregory, exactly. Dick Gregory. And the comedian, he always says, ask yourself why these people are not ducking for cover. Very good question, right? And I think one of these people is Jesse Jackson. Why is they not ducking for cover, right? And I know that one of the witnesses to the killing of MLK, what was his name? I can't remember his name. One of the witnesses to the killing of MLK did say that it's very clear that James Earl Ray didn't do it. Now, a lot of people think James Earl Ray did it, but he had FBI protection because James Earl Ray, you'll remember that they abducted him from France. Like immediately after he shot MLK, he went to France and they extradited him from France. And that James Earl Ray was a leader of the, what is it called? He was a leader of the Friends of Rhodesia clubs. Do people know about the Friends of Rhodesia clubs? Right? This was a white supremacist group that supported the settler regime of Rhodesia. And when Robert Mugabe and the people of Zimbabwe were fighting against Rhodesia, right, the British settler state named after Cecil Rhodes, Rhodesia, there were white supremacists around the world that had fundraisers to raise money for the Rhodesian settlers. And that was James Earl Ray was one of them. He was a friend of Rhodesia. That was his organization. And that, according to most accounts, he's the one who pulled the trigger and killed MLK. Now, I do know that the MLK family, Martin Luther King Jr.'s family, has received money. They have won a lawsuit against the American government for complicity in the killing of King. And that is a fact now, and that the details of the lawsuit that they won are not disclosed. Right. So when people say it's just a crazy conspiracy theory, why are courts awarding money to MLK's family? That makes it sound like there's not a conspiracy theory. I mean, they must have convinced some judge somewhere. But I don't know enough about it. I'm not an MLK assassination expert. But you remember at the time that MLK was killed, all right, 1968, April of 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. is killed. Everybody assumed the American government killed MLK. You know, you read Mao Zedong wrote this beautiful statement on the death of MLK, and in his statement he just assumes. I mean, there's no question in his mind that it was the U.S. government that did it. It's kind of a fascinating thing that that Mao Zedong, I mean, he doesn't question it. No one's asking for evidence. And then immediately afterwards, there were rebellions all over the black community in the United States. I mean, it was the biggest wave of urban rebellions this country had ever seen because, the black community felt overwhelmingly that MLK had been murdered by the American government. Michael Moore always tells the story, and it's in one of his memoirs that, the night that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, he was at Catholic Mass. It was a Wednesday night, and he was at Catholic Mass in this suburb, this kind of wealthy suburb of Flint, Michigan, that he grew up in. He went to Catholic Mass, as he walked out of the Catholic Mass, somebody was outside heating up their car. As the crowd was walking out of the Catholic Mass, somebody was heating up their car and was listening to the radio and had heard the news. And so they shouted to the people coming out in this wealthy suburb, shouted to them all, somebody shot Martin Luther King. And the whole crowd coming out of the Catholic Mass, these are conservatives, right-wing people, they cheered and they said, yeah, and they applauded. Because that was the feeling, right? That was that silent majority that Richard Nixon spoke about, that hated the civil rights movement, that hated the black freedom struggle, that thought Martin Luther King Jr. was a traitor because he denounced capitalism and opposed the Vietnam War. Michael Moore feels traumatized by that. He said he was horrified because his family had loved Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His parents were progressives and leftists, and they were Catholic, and they lived in this upper middle class community, but they supported MLK, and to see the neighborhood kind of cheering for that, it horrified him. Michael Moore tells that story. Michael Moore, I used to really like Michael Moore. During the Bush years, I really loved Bowling for Columbine is a great movie. The Sicko movie he made about healthcare is amazing. But he's really deteriorated in the last few years. I mean, he's just become a regular Democrat, and Michael Moore, it's kind of a sad story, but, he used to do some very, very good work, but he's really disappointed a lot of us. But yeah, this is the statement that Mao Zedong wrote in response to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's called A New Storm Against Imperialism. The first sentence is, some days ago, Martin Luther King, the Afro-American clergyman, was suddenly assassinated by the U.S. imperialists. First sentence right there. The U.S. government did it. Kind of amazing history. So, see, there you go. See, Hempcar, you super chatted me about Jesse Jackson, and you got me talking, right? I said a lot of things, but there you go. There you go. All right. If anyone has any more Rumble rants, Rockfin tips, get me talking here. If not, this is going to be ending pretty soon because I just need something to react to. So this is an interesting one. Piha says Megatron versus Grimlock. Who would win? I don't know who either of those are. Is one of those, is that what is it called? The Transformers. So Megatron is a Transformer. Okay. And who is Grimlock? Who is Grimlock? Oh, Grimlock is also a Transformer. See, I have never seen the Transformers movies. So this is an interesting question. I don't get questions like this a lot. But both Megatron and Grimlock are Transformers. Okay. And he's asking me, who would win among them. Now, is this a question about what happened in the movie? Because I haven't seen the movie. So I don't know, or is he asking me who I think would win? But I don't know. I'm just not up on the Transformers. I have heard that Rainn Wilson, the actor, was in the Transformers movie. He was in one of them, and that he does a pretty good job as a character in the Transformers movie. He plays like a college professor or something. And he plays a college professor who's like really arrogant, and he does a very, very good job. Rainn Wilson, the actor who's on The Office, he plays the kind of the nerdy character on The Office. Dwight, he plays Dwight on The Office, and that Rainn Wilson is in one of the Transformers movies, and he does a very good job. His acting is very believable. He comes across very effectively as the character in the movie, right? I like character actors, right? You know, when they ask you who you like in Hollywood, you're supposed to like the sexy man or the sexy woman, right? You know, I'm a heterosexual male, so I'm supposed to be, they ask me who my favorite actress is, I'm supposed to say what? You know, I'm supposed to say some beautiful woman. And if you're a heterosexual female, if they ask you who your favorite actor or actress is, we don't say actress anymore. We say female actor, right? You're supposed to say the sexiest man you can think of. But for me, I like character actors, right? I will tell you, I met on 2 occasions, I met Wallace Shawn. Do folks know the actor Wallace Shawn? He's in a lot of movies. Wallace Shawn. And, you know, I mean, he's not a leading man, right? But he's a great actor. He's a brilliant actor. And he calls himself a socialist. He's like a DSA socialist. He's written a couple plays, one of which is a socialist kind of play. It's called Fever, which is about, like, you know, a businessman in an anti-imperialist country while there's a military coup going on. Wallace Shawn is a neat guy. But before I knew about his acting or whatever, before I knew about that, I always just liked him. You know, this guy, he was in Princess Bride. He was in Clueless. He's been in a lot of things. I love watching movies with Wallace Shawn. Indubitably. Yes. He's a brilliant, inconceivable. I love this guy. That's the kind of actor I like. And you see them in movie after movie after movie. And they're a character actor, right? They're not playing the sexy man or the sexy woman. They're playing the character. And I love character actors, right? I really do. There's some character actors he plays the Ferengi in Star Trek. I really like Wallace Shawn. I really, really like Wallace Shawn. Maybe it's because, you know, I'm Scotch Irish, I'm Protestant Irish, right? And Wallace Shawn, I mean, doesn't get more Protestant Irish than that. You know, William Wallace and Shawn, which is a traditional Irish name. That's got to be the most Irish name in history. My God, Irish and Scottish name. Wallace Shawn doesn't get more Scotch Irish than that. You know, it's Mel Gibson, Braveheart, and the IRA in one. Wallace Shawn, for Christ's sakes. Just thought of that. I just realized that. Maybe it's an ethnic thing. Maybe I like him because I'm Scotch Irish or Protestant Irish by heritage on both sides. I don't know. I've always liked this guy. I always find him charming, right? That's the kind of actor I like. So you mentioned the Transformers movie. Like, I really like Rainn Wilson. I enjoy his acting. I'll put Rainn Wilson on the screen if you haven't seen him before. I think, you know, and he's not a sexy leading man, right? Rainn Wilson is, you know, he's a good actor who plays a character very, very well in a movie, right? If I was making a movie, I could think of a character that would be played by Rainn Wilson very well, right? You know, I like Rainn Wilson as an actor, right? These are the kind of actors that I like. When I like actors that are character actors, like Rainn Wilson, you know, like Wallace Shawn, who we just had on there. Who was the woman who starred in American Hustle, right? She was the woman who did Hunger Games. She was in the Hunger Games movies, right? You know, she was in the Hunger Games movies, right? Right. And what is her name? I cannot remember her name. She was in the Hunger Games movies, and she's, you know, she's like the angsty woman, right? In the Hunger Games movies, right? But I'm looking for the actress. What is her name? Oh goodness, they're showing the leading woman in the movie. That's not who I'm looking for. The woman who pretends to have the British accent in American Hustle. I'm looking for the other one, the one who plays the wife. Right, her. What is her name? Right? Amy Adams. Is that what her name is? Amy Adams? Right? Amy Adams. No. Amy Adams is the leading woman. Not Amy Adams, right? The other one. And she's a famous actress too. I cannot remember her name. Her name is escaping me, right? Right? What is her name? And she starred in Hunger Games, right? Right? What is her name? Okay. Right. Her name is, here she is. Is it Zoe Dutch? Is that her name? Or no, Jennifer Lawrence. How do I not know that? Jennifer Lawrence, right? So Jennifer Lawrence, I remember when I first went to see American Hustle, I see the character that Jennifer Lawrence is playing, and she's playing this like very kind and loving housewife. And I'm like, how does that work? Because Jennifer Lawrence, she plays the angsty, sad girl in so many movies, right? She's the angsty. Can you hear me now? I was talking about ads. I'm talking about Abscam on the stream tonight. Because I'm talking about Abscam, I'm thinking about the movie American Hustle. American Hustle is a movie, came out 5-6 years ago, a little while back, and it fictionalized. It's a fictionalized account of the Abscams, incident where the FBI was framing up politicians. And what I'm saying is, at the beginning of the movie, at the very beginning of the movie, I saw that that Jennifer Lawrence, this actress, Jennifer Lawrence, that Jennifer Lawrence, that she played this like housewife character, and I was like, how does this work? But as the movie went on, you saw that the character that Jennifer Lawrence played, I mean, it actually was perfect, but you didn't understand what the character was for a while in the movie. So I thought that was very, very clever, Jennifer Lawrence. But yeah, I'm the kind of guy that I've learned that I like in movies the character actors, the ones who really act. Often the leading man and the leading woman, they don't act very much. They're I mean, they do sometimes, but they don't act as much because they're just playing the hero or the heroine, right? They're playing somebody you're supposed to like. They're playing somebody who is the protagonist, and they don't act as much as the character actors do. Right? They're not as much of a character. They're more of just kind of a very good looking person, who's driving the story forward. So there you go. All right. You're on the list. But there you go. But I like character actors. That's all I was saying there. So there we go. All right. Next super chat question. Hey, Caleb, Orban vetoed EU weapons for Ukraine. What are your thoughts on this? Well, I mean, Orban, he's very anti-Russian, right? He's a Hungarian nationalist, but he's from that new right. He's not part of the club, and he's thinking long-term about the interest of his country. And he's saying it's just not in the interest of his country in the long term to, jump on the anti-Russia bandwagon, right? And, he's certainly not a communist. He's certainly not pro-Soviet. He's a very, very nationalistic Hungarian who blames Russia for a lot of their problems. But he's not part of the EU club. He's not a liberal. He's more independent. And he's just like, antagonizing Russia in the long term doesn't benefit Hungary. And this is what they're afraid of with the new right, with the AfD party in Germany, with Marine Le Pen in France, with the Brexit crowd in Britain. That's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of the streak of independence that you see from the lower levels of capital. And I think that Orban, I mean, he's just a nationalist for Hungary. He represents a lot of wealthy Hungarian business owners who feel like Hungary has gotten the short end of the stick. They're not part of the EU club. And that, even though he hates Russia, he could trade with Russia. He could do business with Russia, and that would benefit them in the long term. So there you go. That's kind of how I see, him doing that. And, that shows, look, a lot of people, I have heard this for a long time. Why isn't China backing the Maoists in the Philippines? Why is Russia friendly to all these right-wingers and not friendly to the communists around the world? Well, Russia is friendly to the communists around the world, first of all. I go to the international conferences in Russia. There's communists all over them, right? I mean, the World Youth Festival was in Russia in 2017. They're going to have another one in March. There are plenty of communists who go to Russia. But you have to admit, and you're on the list, you have to admit that when the Soviet Union fell, the global communist movement fell on its face. And that, a lot of the communist groups around the world, especially in the Western countries, in Western Europe and the United States, a lot of the communist groups in the world have just completely failed Russia, right? They completely, let Russia down. Right? When the fall of the Soviet Union happened, they were cheering for it. They were supporting perestroika. They were supporting glasnost. And that a lot of the communist groups in the West are at this point supporting Ukraine, the French Communist Party, and others. So, like, why, if you're Russia, what would you benefit from backing, these tiny, irrelevant communist groups that haven't had your back? Right? I mean, Russia's thinking we need to make friends in the West. The West is mobilizing for World War III against us. Who are we going to make friends with? Well, if most of the communists are denouncing you, if most of the communists didn't have your back when you were a communist government during the Soviet years, why would you put all your chips in that basket, right? Russia makes right-wing friends because there are some right-wingers that, are not excited about sending weapons to Ukraine. There you go. And the same with China. China's not spreading communist revolution around the world. How would China benefit from sending a bunch of guns to a bunch of people in the Philippines who seize islands, right? How would that benefit China, right? Those folks are not going to win. If those folks were going to win, they would have done it by now. Those folks have been waging guerrilla warfare for 50 years, right? They're not going to win. They don't have enough of a base among the population. They're going to take power. They're not going to win. And China needs to have a relationship with the Philippines. It's a very important country. So why, these people that expect China to just, it's going to end its relationship with the Philippines, this very important, country in the Pacific. And instead, it's going to just start unloading weapons to give to a bunch of crazy Maoists who are going to violently overthrow the Philippine government. That's not realistic, right? That wouldn't benefit China. It wouldn't benefit the Philippines because they're not going to win. And the Philippines already hosts U.S. bases, right? So if China were to start giving weapons to the Maoists, that would force the Philippines even further into the U.S. camp. The Philippines has been increasingly independent. Starting with Duterte, the Philippines actually started becoming more economically independent and trading with China. Duterte wanted to make peace with the Maoists, you'll remember, and it didn't happen, right? And these people don't get this, right? They think it is the duty of communist governments to spread communist revolution all over the world. That's called Trotskyism. That's called Trotskyism. That's the theory of permanent revolution, right? And it didn't work. They dissolved the Communist International. Go and read for yourself what Mao said when the Communist International was dissolved. I will pull it up. Go and read Mao's statement on the dissolving of the Communist International. Did he say, oh no, we've lost the Communist International, it's a disaster? No. Mao said that it was a great thing when they dissolved the Communist International because they hadn't been listening and taking orders from it for a long time anyway. I'll link you the article where Mao supported dissolving the Comintern because he said that, at this point, China is acting independently. Here's the statement, May 26, 1943, right? Mao said that dissolving the Comintern was a good thing, and the Comintern has long ceased to meddle in our internal affairs, right? Go and read it for yourself, right? The idea of, communist governments just spreading communism all over the world and fomenting global civil war, that's called Trotskyism, and it's not realistic. And at the same time, right, communists in the United States, we shouldn't be taking orders from any country, right? We have a duty to be anti-imperialist, to oppose the march toward World War III, to support the forces that are resisting Western capitalism around the world. But, look, North Korea, they thought Donald Trump was a better candidate for them. Cuba, they thought Obama was a better candidate for them. Well, should we be endorsing, Obama because the Cubans like him? No. Should we be endorsing Trump because the North Koreans like him? No. We should be doing what we think is best for the working class movement in this country, right? We shouldn't be agents of any foreign government, right? And we're not, right? If you're a real communist in America, you want to advance the American working class to eventually seize power. You don't want to act as an agent of Russia, an agent of China, an agent of Cuba or Venezuela or Iran or any other country, right? And so, the Communist International was not very realistic, right? Maybe at one point it was necessary for the Bolsheviks to teach what they learned, the tactics and the methods that they learned to parties around the world. It was necessary for them to kind of give guidance and support to the revolutionary anti-imperialist wing of the labor movement. So it served its purpose, but when they dissolved it, that was a good thing, right? And we don't want to restore the Communist International. It's good that communists get together and talk to each other. Things like World Anti-Imperialist Platform are great. The World Youth Festivals are great, but the idea that the communists of the world should all be coordinating their actions in line with what some communist government wants, that hurt the Soviet Union. That enabled people around the world who didn't like the Soviet Union to accuse the Soviet Union of just being foreign agents, of just being, you're just Russian spooks, you're just Russian spies. So yeah, we are for an independent policy for communists in this country and around the world. We're for anti-imperialist solidarity, always standing with oppressed countries when they're under attack, always opposing imperialism as the main danger to humanity. But we are not advocates of being agents of a foreign power. All right. All righty. Next question. Have you seen Godzilla -1? I haven't even heard of that in theaters currently. It takes place during and after World War II, and it's a very period film. That sounds fascinating, right? I've seen a number of the Godzilla films, the old ones from Japan. I've seen, some of the ones they made in the 80s. That was like, they would have Godzilla versus this, Godzilla versus that. It was kind of a precursor to the Power Rangers. They'd have some guy in a rubber suit, being Godzilla and all of that. I saw some of the newer Godzilla movies. Godzilla versus King Kong. I enjoyed that. Both of them, right? I enjoyed that. I really did enjoy that. The one that came out in the 70s and the newer one. I enjoyed that. I really did enjoy Godzilla versus King Kong. It was fun. I mean, that was a lot of fun. And so I should go see that. Godzilla -1. That's an interesting title for a movie. I ought to go see that. My wife and I, we like to go to the movies. It's a thing we do. Some evening, my wife and I, we ought to go see Godzilla -1, right? We'll see if my wife likes that. I'll probably go out here in a little bit and say hi to my wife and her friends that are visiting. And I'll say I want to go see Godzilla -1. And she'll be like, I don't want to see that. But maybe she will. Who knows? Maybe my wife will want to see Godzilla -1. Who knows? Who knows, right? There is a movie theater in our neighborhood, and I'll bet you anything that movie theater does have Godzilla -1. It tends to have those kinds of movies. So there you go. Oh, it's Japanese. It's a Japanese made. Okay, well, that's more true to the Godzilla genre. I appreciate that. Could you watch Pino Solanas' interview after being shot in a failed assassination attempt after testifying against Menem in 1991? Well, Battle Cossack, you're going to have to email me that one. Because that's a very, very specific thing. But if you can email it to me, calebmaupin@gmail.com. That's my email. Very public. I don't, if you ever want to email me or get in touch with me, I am available. calebmaupin@gmail. Right? This is how you can reach me. Right. And I'm on Zelle too. So if you ever want to send me me and my wife a holiday gift to celebrate the holidays, you can send us, you can Zelle me at that address too. That sends it right to my bank account. If you want to Zelle me, send me and my wife a holiday gift. We could use it because the rent in this new place is through the roof. But, or if you just want to email me, you can just email me at calebmaupin@gmail. If you can email me that clip, Battle Cossack, I will try to watch it, maybe show it on a stream and react to it. But I don't know enough about it. I don't know the context. I don't think I can show it tonight. But I do appreciate that. And like I said, if anyone ever wants to email me, feel free, calebmaupin@gmail, right? You're not supposed to put it in actual print, right? Because then somebody finds it and then you get spam and all that, right? The machines, the bots find it. So, I didn't type it out exactly, but you all know what calebmaupin@gmail is, right? So I get a lot of emails and, I can't always respond. I try my best to respond to fan mail. But I can't always do that, right? I can't always do that. Oh, we have another Rockfin tip from Hempcar. He says, Chris Hedges said in a recent speech on Gaza, imperialism is the external face of white supremacy, but they often seem more synonymous since imperialism is the engine that keeps racism going in the world. Well, I know Chris Hedges. I don't know him personally, but, I worked with him. I was in the office with him, and he's not a Marxist. He's a great guy, and I respect him, and he spoke at the Rage Against the War Machine rally. I give him credit for that, and, we bonded over the years, and we got to be friendlier with each other, and I respect the fact that he's taking a stand for the Palestinians. I admire him in a lot of ways. But he's not a Marxist. And I'm not saying that as a diss. He doesn't call himself that, right? He is a Christian theologian. He's a leftist. He's probably like a social democrat or a Christian socialist. He's a theologist. And when he says imperialism, he's probably referring to like military attacks, conquest, right? He's not using the scientific Marxist term for imperialism. When I talk about imperialism, I'm talking about what Lenin wrote about in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. I'm talking about the domination of the world by banks and corporations. I think Chris Hedges, he writes more in terms of, he's anti-war. He's a pacifist. He's very much a pacifist. He's written a lot about war, war is the force that gives us meaning, I think was one of his books. And he's written a lot about the atrocities that war commits and the ugly, bloody atrocities that he's seen in war conflicts around the world. And so he's going to be talking about it differently. look, right now, right? Yes, you are right that white supremacism has been the driving force behind imperialism. That's been the justification, right? You can look at the poems of Rudyard Kipling. Take up the white man's burden, bring forth the best ye breed, right? I mean, white supremacism has been the guiding ideology of imperialism in the past, but right now the imperialists are very much trying to give themselves a woke makeover. They're trying to say, oh, look, we're not the America of the Ku Klux Klan anymore. No, we're a whole new country that's tolerant and open-minded. The mainstream current among the imperialists is this kind of weird woke pseudo left stuff. Now that could change, but that is the prevailing ideology among the imperialists at this time, right? They are trying their hardest to not sound like white supremacists right now. I mean, you have to admit that. So there you go. All right, folks. Well, it's time to wind this down. It's been fun. I've enjoyed it. Are there any Rockfin tips? No. It's been a fun stream. It's interesting how we start talking about, there we go. We got another question has come in. How has imperialism evolved since Lenin's time? All right, well, I'll quickly answer this. Imperialism in Lenin's time was very much based on building up and cultivating a layer of workers in the imperialist homeland who were loyal to empire, what they called the aristocracy of labor. Right, that as imperialism was spreading its tentacles all across the planet, there was a layer of workers in the homeland who got some of the crumbs, and the skilled workers, and the aristocracy of labor, where there was a section of the working class that saw their living standard rise because of imperialism, and then broke with the rest of the working class. Right, that was key in the rise of imperialism in the Second International and the socialist groups and the labor unions becoming non-revolutionary. That's a really important point that Lenin makes. If you really want to understand Lenin's theory of imperialism, you can read the big, thick book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, or you can read Imperialism and the Split in Socialism, which is a very amazing essay that Lenin wrote, explaining his theory of imperialism and explaining why World War I broke out and why the socialist parties had abandoned their anti-war stance. A really important book, or important essay called Imperialism and the Split in Socialism. And that in Lenin's time, they were cultivating a layer of workers in the imperialist homeland that were what they called, what they called the aristocracy of labor. Now they are systemically demolishing the aristocracy of labor, and that in the imperialist homeland, the main way the imperialists, the big corporations are making profits is not through the creation of products for export to dominate international markets. It's through, what they call like cannibalism, prisons for profit, the opioid epidemic, accumulation through destruction. My old friend Bill Doris, who was in the Workers' World Party with me, he developed a theory that I think he's right about, and I give him credit for it. I didn't think of this; he thinks of it, and I mean, he deserves the credit for it. I wish he would write more about it because he's right, and I've delved more into it. And I probably get it wrong, but Bill Doris, he helped me to understand that we're living in a period defined by what they call destructive accumulation, meaning that the way imperialism is making its profits, is through destroying and eating up the economy of the imperialist homelands. They are demolishing the aristocracy of labor, and they are cannibalizing the imperialist homelands. And that is something that was not happening during Lenin's day. During Lenin's day, the Western countries were stabilizing because of imperialism. All right, Caleb, please discuss Anthony Sutton's claims about Wall Street funding the Bolsheviks, and giving the Chinese, the Soviet Communist Party all of its technology. All right, well, first things first, right? Anthony Sutton claims that because of the fact that Trotsky got a U.S. passport, that means he was an agent. Well, Trotsky had intelligence connections, but you have to remember Trotsky didn't join the Bolsheviks until July of 1917. And that he was an enemy of the Bolsheviks until July of 1917. And he was very much an agent of German imperialism. And he was living in New York City, and he went back to Russia in February of 1917. And he saw the Bolsheviks were going to win, and he threw in and he joined the Bolsheviks. So this whole thing about Trotsky got a passport, got a visa into the United States, and all of this stuff, it's like none of that matters because Trotsky was anti-Bolshevik. They also talk about Wall Street, about a guy named Jacob Schiff. And Jacob Schiff was a wealthy Wall Street banker who was one of the main financial backers of the World Zionist Organization. And he funded a group in Russia called the Russian Freedom Group, the RFG. Why did he fund them? Because the Tsar was anti-Semitic and was waging pogroms and was persecuting Jews. And so he funded a group that was anti-Tsar. The Russian Freedom Group was anti-Bolshevik. And the World Zionist Organization was anti-Bolshevik. Almost as soon as the Russian Revolution happened, the World Zionist Organization started, moving Jews out of Russia to Palestine. So, the idea that Jacob Schiff is responsible for the Bolshevik Revolution is bullshit. You have to remember the American government supported the overthrow of the Tsar. The European powers supported the overthrow of the Tsar. The Tsar was viewed as incompetent and losing the war. Okay. The overthrow of the Tsar in February is not the same as the Bolsheviks taking power in October. A lot of very wealthy people wanted the Tsar out because they thought he was incompetent. So that's bullshit. As far as Wall Street giving the Bolsheviks all their technology, it was a business deal. One of the attacks that you hear frequently leveled against the Soviet Union is that Stalin exported grain during the famine. Well, that was to buy and pay for the technology. They paid for it, right? They hired guys from Ford Motor Company to come over and help them set up their car factories. They hired Fred Koch, the father of the Koch brothers, to come and help them set up their oil industry, right? They hired General Electric to come and help them build their power plants. And they were very open about doing that. But they were state-run Soviet power plants, and they paid for it. They didn't do it for free, right? General Electric didn't come over there and help them set up their power plant for free. They paid for it, and they paid for it in quite a cost, right? At the time, people were starving, and they knew in order to prevent famines from ever happening, they had to have tractors. And so they sold some grain so they'd have money, and they used that money to buy technology to make their own tractors. So yes, they did absolutely, hire Western companies to come and help them set up their state-run industry. That's a fact. There's no disputing that. But that doesn't make them agents of Wall Street, right? I mean, BP, BP was hired by Russia. John Brown of BP was hired by Russia to help them run their state-run oil industry, run Gazprom and Rosneft. I mean, it's like they make deals all the time, right? You remember Citgo, right? Citgo in the United States, was a gas, company that did that business with Venezuela, right? The idea that a Wall Street company does business with a socialist country and that makes them their agent, that's ridiculous. Okay. And Anthony Sutton, he bends over backwards to try and make the case. And the stuff about Trotsky, I mean, I'm sorry, Trotsky ended up turning against the Russian Revolution. Trotsky wasn't a Bolshevik until July of 1917. The stuff about the Russian Freedom Group and Jacob Schiff is just anti-Semitic crap. It's anti-Semitic bullshit, right? The stuff about doing business deals with American companies to use their technology, they paid for it at great cost. So that's just malarkey, right? There was a guy on Wall Street in the 80s named Armand Hammer, and he was a guy on Wall Street who was at odds with the rest of Wall Street because he did business in the Soviet Union, right? And he had a license by the American government. He went over there and did business. So does that prove the Soviet Union was an agent of Wall Street because Armand Hammer did business over there? Of course not. Just proves there was one capitalist who thought he could make some money doing business over there. All right. How can MSN keep getting away with fake stories like forced labor in Xinjiang and haircuts in North Korea without sourcing and evidence? Well, for a couple reasons. One of the main reasons is because they just have hegemony, right? They rig the algorithms on social media. They have the major TV networks. Number two is that if you condition somebody, if you create a narrative where China are the bad guys, North Korea are the bad guys, you can say whatever you want about them, right? And if you say, well, hey, is that true? Everyone looks at you and says, are you defending North Korea? Are you just saying the North Koreans are good? And they've created an atmosphere in the American mainstream media where there's good guys and there's bad guys. So if you're in the newsroom and somebody comes in and says, we're going to do a story on Kim Jong-il's crazy haircuts, if you raise your hand as the person in the room and say, how do we know it's true? They're all going to look at you and be like, what, are you defending them? They create an atmosphere where that's appropriate. Now, we also know that mainstream media outlets tend to have a relationship with intelligence agencies. Years ago, I had dinner with the top Korean scholar in the United States. What is his name? He wrote Korea's Place in the Sun. He wrote North Korea, Another Country. What is his name? I had dinner with Bruce Cummings. Bruce Cummings is the top Korean scholar. He's visited North Korea a number of times. not a communist. And I asked Bruce Cummings, I said, is it true? I said to him, what about all these claims about North Korea, about, that Kim Jong-il has the world's largest collection of pornography and lives in a palace while the people are starving and makes everyone get a haircut. And he said he frequently gets calls from mainstream American news wanting him to confirm crazy stories like that. And he can't confirm any of them. He says, how would I know? It's like, does anyone go over there and look? I mean, there's no way to confirm any of that. And then he always asks them their source. Where did you hear this? And they'll always say an anonymous source in the South Korean military. Yeah. A lot of that stuff is just bullshit. Now, one of the more interesting things is there was a Japanese filmmaker who moved to North Korea because he was a communist. And then when the food crisis happened, he moved back. And in order to go back to Japan, he made up this whole crazy story about how he was kidnapped. And if you look at the details, that guy just defected. He was a communist, right? He was a communist from Japan, and he wanted to move to North Korea and become a North Korean filmmaker, and he moved there voluntarily. And then in the 1990s, they had a food crisis, and people were starving, and he didn't want to be starving because they were having a food crisis. So he made up a story and said, oh, I was kidnapped. And then he came back to, he did that. And there were a couple American GIs who did that too. But Joseph Dresnach, the American GI who stayed there and died, there's a great documentary about him. He says that was bullshit. He said, no, we were allowed to leave at any time, and actually North Korea's border, the North Korean border with China, is one of the most open borders in history. People in North Korea can leave, right? People in North Korea in the 90s, when they were having the food crisis in North Korea, people were leaving like crazy. There is no fence between North Korea and China. And people from North Korea were going over the border into China all the time, right? The idea that the people in North Korea are all trapped and they can't leave, bullshit. They can walk right over that Chinese border, and many thousands of them did during the food crisis in the 1990s. You can look at that. The North Korean border with China is very, very open. No one ever talks about that, of course, right? That gets obscured. But anyway, folks, I've got to be going. So I'm going to put on the closing music, but thank you for the questions. Thanks for getting me talking. And it's been fun. I'm going to put on the closing music, but I'll be back tomorrow. I'm probably going to stream twice tomorrow if I can, right? I'm trying to stream as much as I can. Happy holidays, everybody. I'll be back. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.